Welcome to the More Perfect Union, the podcast that offers real debate without the hate. I'm Kevin Kelton, and the More Perfect Union is made possible by a $91.5 million bond grant from the Chubb Group and listeners like you, and listeners like Rebecca Cushmiter.
I'm here in my kitchen, like so many of you, to do a podcast about how emotional I get when I talk about this great country of ours in Kensington, Maryland.
Oh my gosh, that was the response to my opening. And here with another response to my opening is DJ McGuire.
That's right, DJ McGuire coming to you from Hampton Roads, Virginia, courtesy of Dark Brandon's Dark Money.
This is a rockin' week. We've got a lot to cover, guys.
A lot to cover, a lot of dark money all over the place. Let's start with Trump posting his $91.5 million bond. That was brought to you by the Chubb Group. Did you guys know about that?
Yeah, I heard about that. And all I've got to say is I don't think we as a nation are mature enough to experience 4 years of saying Secretary Chubb when whichever Chubb granted him that money gets a cabinet post in exchange for that loan.
It's a company incorporated in Switzerland. So Donald Trump is borrowing from effectively a foreign public corporation. I thought he hated people who did stuff like that. We do know that the CEO, a fellow named Evan Greenberg, was put on Trump's trade advisory group when he was president. So these people already have a history of screwing up our trade policy. Now they're apparently going to screw up our justice system.
That's no surprise. I mean, the cronyism is what it is in Trump world. You know, I'm actually impressed that there's somebody left from that trade advisory group that hasn't been burned by Trump's policies and is still willing to do business with him. I think most people fled his company, didn't they?
And on the bright side of the dark money issue this week, I just discovered this before the podcast. Dark Brandon has his own source of dark money. Seems there's some really rich couple in New York are funding his campaign to the tune of millions and millions of dollars. And I said to DJ just before we started, to me, that's the feel-good story of the week.
Like, is it Bill and Hillary Clinton? Did they start a PAC?
Now, let's see if I could find out what their names were.
If an AI crypto investor has come to the realization that Joe Biden is the only obstacle between the United States of America and Russian colonization, well, then that's okay with me. First things first.
Yeah, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
That's right. So let's look at the State of the Union. I assume everybody saw at least part of it.
Oh, yeah, I watched it from start to finish. It was like I made myself stay awake for it because I knew that you were going to like quiz me on it, Kevin. I figured there'd be.
Well, I was able to take a nice nap while he was walking to the podium.
As he got stuck with Marjorie Taylor Greene yelling at him in her trucker hat.
I got to tell you, I thought the classiest thing of the entire night was that he turned the tables on her. She had handed him, I guess, this emblem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a button.
A button. And he had the wherewithal, and obviously this wasn't scripted because he didn't know that was going to happen. When she started calling out that name, he reached for the button. He said the name correctly. He told the woman's story. Marjorie Taylor Greene dared him to say the woman's name, and he made it a centerpiece of the speech, and he did it off the cuff. I thought that was really classy.
I thought it was great. And here's the thing that Marjorie Taylor Greene isn't bright enough to understand. Democrats are not pro rape and murder. Like that we're not here to make that a thing. We don't want people to be brutalized when they're out for a run. We just don't differentiate as strongly between criminals with legal documentation and criminals without legal documentation. We don't want anybody to be raped or murdered by anybody else.
Yeah,
And
in the Republicans' minds, Americans have the right to rape and murder people.
Right,
Aliens
yes.
do not.
It was a good speech. It was definitely a campaign speech, and it did what he needed it to do. And I like the way he's flipping the age question a little bit and making it about experience, because that was really the only way out. I was thinking about it this morning. I wrote a bunch of pieces about Joe Biden back on our website in 2020. And one of the things I had said then was that he doesn't have an underbelly. You know, he's an open book. You can't go find some secrets about him. And the Trump campaign really hit that wall in 2020 and didn't know how to campaign against him. And this year they tried to manufacture a scandal with Hunter, and they've gotten some traction with questions about his age. But that's all they've got. That's all they've got. So for him to be able to find a path out of that narrative is probably going to leave the Republican side a little bit flat-footed. I hope.
They're not going to know what to do. They're going to have to try to go back to issues. The problem is for the Republicans is that on a lot of the issues that they would normally really go after Joe Biden hard, Donald Trump actually agrees with Biden on a lot of them, or is worse than Biden on them from a center-right point of view, so they can't use them. They can't they can't really use economics because Donald Trump is just as bad on international trade. He's just as bad on regulations. He just likes different regulations. He clearly wants a government that is just as active as Joe Biden's. In fact, he wants a government that's more active. He just wants to use it to punish his enemies. None of this is actually good for economic growth. So they can't really use that as an argument. The worst Biden foreign policy mistake was actually following the Trump policy in Afghanistan. So they can't use that. They're on the wrong side of the Russia issue.
They'll use it, but it's that was the summer of 2021.
That was the summer of 2021. But Joe Biden's approval rating.
We start seeing ads,
of course,
of those.
I'm sure they will, because
the
Joe Biden's approval rating was at 50% on August 14th, 2021. It has never been there since.
Yeah.
I keep telling people how important that was in the perception of him, and how much he has had to do and still has to do to recover his image and the administration's image from that point. The trouble is, the idea that Donald Trump could do a withdrawal better than Joe Biden only works with Donald Trump's partisans. Nobody else actually believes that kind of nonsense. The age issue is the one that works the best. And yeah, Biden's going to address it. I mean, how much history would be different over the last 50 years if Gerald Ford had just made a crack about how clumsy he was? I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
So we're not going to, spend the whole show on the speech, but I wanted to talk about a couple of things that he mentioned. First of all, he brought up shrinkflation, which is something that I was only tangentially aware of until he brought it up in the State of the Union. I'm sure you guys were more aware of it than I was. And I just read an article today, again, prepping for the show, that told me even our houses are being targeted by shrinkflation. Builders are now, to save money, building smaller houses with fewer doors and fewer windows and fewer cabinets. So yes, you get the same price house, but you get less house for it. Did you guys know about that?
I didn't know about that. That's interesting that cutting down on doors and windows is a cost cutter.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's fire codes that need to evaluate that. I mean, egresses are a big deal.
Yeah, but a lot of houses have more than they need.
Yeah, it's less time cutting drywall, which probably saves on labor. There's less glass. But the thing that bothers me is that, yes, shrinkflation is out there. It is a version of inflation where instead of a higher price for the same product, it's a smaller size product for the same price. But it's not market forces when it comes to residential real estate. This is the result of decades of NIMBYism, continually restricting housing supply year upon year, decade upon decade. And we are finally coming to terms with the fact that you simply cannot do that kind of thing and account for a growing population, even a population growing as slowly as the United States of America. The tide is slowly turning on this, but nothing in residential real estate is due to quote unquote market forces.
The other thing that was brought up in the State of the Union was his strong stance pro-Ukraine. Again, I know that we all are champions of that position. I was a little shocked today, although nothing that Carrie Lake ever says should shock me, but she was being interviewed on CNN, and they asked her about where she stood on Ukraine, and she said that she felt it was time to stop funding them. And when they asked why, she said, that war is lost. Not it's going to be lost, she said, that war is lost.
Well, that's their whole thing. They don't want to admit they're rooting for Russia. They don't want to admit Donald Trump is rooting for Russia. So now they're pretending, oh, well, it's just over. Never mind that there are large swathes of Ukrainian territory that Russia has never stepped foot in. They have not stepped foot in anything west of the Chernobyl power plant, which is half the freaking country. Odessa has never been under occupation. Lviv has never been under occupation. The war is not lost. Ukraine is having trouble because they have to ration ammunition. So they are losing a couple of towns, and hopefully they can keep it to that instead of losing major territory. But the idea that the war is lost is ridiculous. It is gaslighting, and it is meant to confuse people and make them think that Ukraine is no longer something they have to worry about, so they can just sit on their hands and let Vladimir Putin roll over all of Eastern Europe. None of that is true.
Isn't half the point, or maybe the entire point of Putin's incursion into Ukraine to gain control of the Black Sea ports?
Yes.
And every day that he has not been allowed to progress closer to those ports and gain control of those ports is actually a victory against his ultimate goal.
Russia is losing the naval battle to a country that doesn't have a navy.
Which is, Russia, what is it? Russian warship, go fuck yourself. Wasn't that the...
Yeah.
The response at the beginning of the war. Yeah. And what did I see? I saw a headline, and I think it was Friday, and I didn't get a chance to explore it. The Pope suggesting that Ukraine surrender. Did that happen, or did I dream it?
He didn't say surrender. He said negotiate. He called it the courage of the white flag. The thing is, I, as a Catholic, now have to remind everyone that Pope Francis was an Argentine cleric who was a little too comfy with the various fascist regimes that ruled that country in the 1970s. Mm-hmm. Sorry, folks. It is what it is.
Yeah. And you know what? Peace, love, and understanding has its place. But when one country is trying to swallow up your country and they're not willing to negotiate, we go back to the whole issue with Israel and Hamas. Why can't we have a ceasefire with both sides? Because one side doesn't want it. That's why.
Yeah. And we're seeing that with Hamas moving the goalposts.
Yes.
At first it was, let's get a ceasefire so we can exchange hostages. Okay, fine. You can have 6 weeks pause, release hostages. And Hamas like, no. We didn't want 6 weeks anymore. We want a permanent ceasefire. And now you're seeing some of Hamas' favorite, I'm going to call her Hamas' favorite representative, Rashida Tlaib. I have tried to consider her position in good faith. I have done it over and over again. She is an outright anti-Zionist, and I've come to the conclusion that anti-Zionism really is anti-Semitism. We can discuss it if we want, but it may take another hour.
You're not going to get any disagreement from me.
Well, I know that, but I have tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. I've tried to see that she's just looking out for I would say her people, because she herself is ethnic Palestinian, just like the people of Ireland are my people, even though both of us are American. I don't mean differently. But when she changes her demand from ceasefire to lasting ceasefire, that means she is following the goalposts that Hamas is moving. That she is not interested in what anyone else outside of Hamas has to say about the matter. And that means that she is now either gaslighting us or being gaslighted by Hamas. Either way, she cannot be listened to. And I am glad that the administration and that the overwhelming majority of the Democratic Party is not doing so. The Israeli government has done plenty of things worthy of criticism, no doubt. Biden himself has criticized them. He did it at the State of the Union itself. But just insisting on doing whatever Hamas wants is not going to solve this problem. I wish Congresswoman Tlaib understood that, but clearly she doesn't. And until she does, and because she doesn't, she now needs to be replaced by a Democrat who does. So I sincerely hope she loses her congressional primary.
Well, let me speak. I'm not going to speak to Tlaib and her primary, as that probably has political ramifications far beyond just that district. But I'm going to take a shot here. We all know that it's folly for anyone to suggest they have a solution in the Middle East. Anyone who thinks that they can solve the Middle East is as deluded as you can be. But that said, I am going to put forward my idea here, not for a full-time or permanent solution, but how the United States and Israel can counter this proposal in a way that I think would be to Israel's advantage and accomplish the goal that everybody wants, which is to see less killing in the Middle East. They should say, yes, if Hamas will release all of the hostages and the bodies of hostages that they are holding under a controlled and agreed upon schedule, we will agree to a permanent ceasefire as long as there are no more attacks on Israeli land. And the second that Hamas or Hezbollah fires one missile into Israel, the permanent ceasefire is no more.
Yeah, it needs
Put
to
it
be
on them.
A conditional ceasefire.
Yeah, but
like we'll stop shooting.
Well, no,
if you
call it a
stop
permanent
shooting.
ceasefire until they attack us.
Yeah,
us being Israel.
But at that point, they fire one or two missiles, and then the question becomes: is Israel really going to send in a massive military force, kill a whole bunch of human shields, and blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera? And there's no guarantee that the Israeli government in that future time frame is going to look at that and decide, well, one or two missiles is worth a full military effort again.
DJ, you misunderstood my suggestion, and that's okay because I probably didn't explain it clearly enough. I'm not saying that Israel should pull out of Gaza. They've made it clear they have no intention of pulling out of Gaza. And I'm not talking about the so-called two-state solution. I'm talking about a permanent ceasefire. Israel will maintain their troops and they will maintain control of Gaza until there is a new ruling authority there. But if one missile crosses the border, this is no longer the pre-October 7th world where Bibi Netanyahu may have indicated that one or two missiles do not justify a massive incursion into occupied territories. This is the new world in which if they ever try anything again, they will suffer a massive retaliation. And your point is well taken. It would be very expensive and very complex to pull all those men and all of those troops out of Gaza and then have to invade Gaza again. I'm not saying that. I'm saying they stay there and the Gazans won't like it. But, I've got to say the F word to the Gazans. You're living in a new world now, a world that was created by the people that ostensibly represent you. And yes, you need to get tons more relief. You need to be able to return to your homes. But we ain't going back to the pre-October 7th world ever again.
A permanent ceasefire is not a long-term solution for anybody. I know where you're coming from, Kevin. I know what you're trying, but the simple fact of the matter is a lasting ceasefire, which is the demand, is impossible except in one scenario, and that is a surrender to Hamas. If you're not going to surrender to Hamas, unfortunately, this has to keep going. Now, it should keep going in a way that is not so callous regarding Palestinian civilians. That is something where I think the agreement, most people agree, but that's not the same thing as you should not prosecute this war. And
totally agree.
The Hamas people have been trying to find various different ways to say Israel should not prosecute this war. And you can tell, and I've done it, I've seen it on social media myself, when you start pressing them about why they are so upset at what Israel is doing, why they are willing to call it genocide, which it is not, by the way, however terrible you may think it is. It doesn't meet the definition.
Agreed.
You ask them what you would have them do differently, give them all sorts of conditions that they can match, and they don't answer any of them. They go all the way back to 1948. They go back to bizarre settler colonialism talking points because they're not really interested in any of that. They are interested in Israel's destruction, and they really couldn't care about anything else. And they're using all these word salads as cover for what they really want, which is an end to the Jewish state of Israel. And if you are going to tell us that self-determination is an acceptable and noble goal for everyone except the Jewish people, then you are being anti-Semitic. Period. End of paragraph. Last page in the book. I won't hear anything else from anyone else about this anymore.
And you won't hear anything else from me about it either.
Well, and thank you guys for giving us that TED Talk.
I would just like to spend a few minutes trying to show the difference between moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans, because we had an example of them as a result of Super Tuesday, where basically the front runners swept everything except Vermont, which went for Nikki Haley, and American Samoa, which nobody pays attention to except during football season and primary season. And whenever Dwayne Johnson's on the screen, they went for.
Can you blame
us?
Never heard of.
Like,
can you blame us for paying attention when Dwayne Johnson's on the screen?
No. He is a tribute to American Samoa. I have nothing against him.
He is a tribute to manhood writ large.
So,
sorry. All right. Diversion there.
When that was over, Dean Phillips, who had basically had an opportunity to maintain a fundraising line, get himself a guaranteed television slot as a Biden skeptic just asking questions, basically put all that aside and effectively ended his own political career by saying, I'm out of this race. I'm endorsing Joe Biden. He put the country above himself. He put the country above his own ambition. And I'm sure it's not the last we've seen of Dean Phillips. He'll probably come back later, but he'll come back because he's a decent guy who actually has some character and some recognition of the moment that he is in.
Yeah. I mean, he'll probably he'll end up as governor of Minnesota or something like that.
Right.
And
he'll be like that.
Well, let me ask you guys this. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment. Why is Dean Phillips a good guy for dropping out of the race and endorsing the presumptive nominee of his party? But when people do that on the Republican side, they're not good people.
I'll happily answer that. Dean Phillips dropped out of the race because he was rejected by the Democratic Party. He endorsed Joe Biden, and he made it clear he endorsed Joe Biden because he believed electing Joe Biden was in the best interest of the country. He didn't endorse Joe Biden because he was a Democrat. He endorsed Joe Biden because Joe Biden is the best person in the field, and they both happen.
But isn't that what the
Democrats.
Republicans think they're doing?
No. I know these people. I was on the other side, if you remember, for 25 years. I know scores of moderate Republicans. I know them at the local elected level. I know them at the state elected level. And I used to know one or two of them at the federally elected level. These people have no courage. They are utter cowards. They actually use cowardice as one of their selling points. I am afraid of them, but I will help you because I'm afraid of you too. They have their own views, but they don't have enough courage. They literally do not have the courage of their own convictions. Each and every one of them know that Donald Trump is an existential danger to the country. Each and every one of them know that Joe Biden is a Democrat for which they have disagreements, but with whom they can work because a number of them have worked with him over all sorts of issues over the last several years. But none of them, except for Phil Scott, governor of Vermont, are willing to step out and say, Joe Biden is the better choice than Donald Trump, even though each and every single MFing one of them know that Joe Biden is the better choice than Donald Trump, because they are too afraid of losing their careers. They're too afraid of losing the sweet lobbying gig that they can get as a Republican lobbyist and as the Republican whisperer for these various interest groups. They are too afraid of their own voters. They are simply afraid of everyone and everything around them. And they are going to live their lives as cowards. They are going to die as cowards. They're going to be forgotten as cowards. The only question is, can the rest of us cobble together and hold the pro-democracy coalition so that we don't go down with them?
So just slightly changing the subject a little bit, I have a new concern this week. I guess the ongoing melodrama, the ongoing soap opera of the More Perfect Union from now until sometime in the mid-January of 2025 is going to be Kevin's nightmare of the week. I'm now no longer so worried about how the election is going to turn out vote-wise, who's going to get more votes, who's going to win the swing states. I'm concerned about what I'm calling the succession election. Did you guys watch Succession, especially in the last season?
I didn't.
As soon as I heard what it was, I made a habit to avoid it because, to some extent, a lot of us are living that just from the outside and not the inside.
Well, we are living it. So, I'll bring you up to speed. In the final season of Succession, there was a subplot about a presidential election with a moderate Democrat running against a very right-wing Republican. Where did they come up with that idea? And how Roystar, the company that owned the Fox News of that little universe, that fictional universe, they were, of course, aligned with the Republican. Anyways, come election day in this fictional national general election, a fire broke out at a big Wisconsin election center, and over 100,000 mail-in ballots were destroyed in this fire. Nobody knew whether it was arson or whether it was an electrical fire.
I remember hearing a bit about this. Go on.
And because Wisconsin law didn't have any way to adjudicate this, and they couldn't determine, or they couldn't, reconstruct those ballots, 100,000 mail-in ballots that would have gone to the Democrat in a large majority no longer existed. Therefore, the Republican won the presidency in a squeaker. The reason that I'm calling this the succession election is because I have a fear that's been literally keeping me up at night the last several days, that we're going to see something like that on a larger scale in 2024. I believe that the forces that want Donald Trump back in the White House, and of course the ones that we know of are the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and right-wing groups that are in the public domain, but there are also probably many that no one, or certainly we, don't know about. They're being quiet right now, but I don't believe they're going to let this election slip away without a fight that they intend to win. And I think that there's going to be a lot of hijinks right before and during Election Day that are going to skewer the results of this election.
I agree. And I think election security has to be one of the top priorities for every state secretary of state or attorney general. And I think the FBI needs to be monitoring this. And honestly, I'm not sure the CIA doesn't need to be monitoring this, because, we are talking about foreign interference. There needs to be significant intelligence and investigative work going on starting now.
Right. And it ain't happening. It ain't happening. And you and I had this conversation offline, or I should say off the show during the week. The thing is, Rebecca, the secretaries of state and the attorney generals of Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, they have no clue how to defend against this stuff. They don't have the resources. They don't have the criminal
investigative capacity,
investigative background. They're just assuming it's going to be another election day, and they just have to get enough 65-year-old senior citizens to show up as poll workers, and everything will be fine.
Well, no. I'm going to disagree with that last statement, because I know election workers in North Carolina, and their lives are already more dangerous than they were several years ago. That is something that has also hit media reports all over the country. I mean, the 2 Georgia election workers are still owed umpty squat millions of dollars from Rudolph Giuliani. It is impossible for anyone to think that 2024 is going to be as calm as even 2020, let alone 2016. I don't think anybody believes that. Whether or not someone thinks there is a deliberate conspiracy to destroy votes or to, say, seize polling places, which is not something we should discount, I don't know how far along that stuff is being investigated. One, because they're not really going to tell us in March of an election year how far along they are investigating that kind of thing. Because this far out, you don't want to let your targets know that you're onto them, because they're just going to bury themselves deeper and make it harder for you to go after them.
Of course, but I don't believe it's happening.
I do think there is concern in Michigan. I know there is concern in Pennsylvania, because the Secretary of State was the honest Republican election official in Philadelphia who got death threats from Trumpers all the time. He knows the danger that's out there. I don't share your pessimism, Kevin, but I do think raising the alarm is viable, because at worst, we'll find out that, oh yeah, they really were on top and everything's okay. At best, someone will hear this and say, what are we doing regarding this kind of thing? And a light bulb will go on in somebody's head that should have gone on months ago. So is it a concern? Yes, it should be a concern. Do I think it's being handled? I personally do. But that's no reason for people who don't think it's being handled to keep their mouths shut. Go ahead and sound the alarm, because it's something that is alarming enough that it needs to be sounded, whether it's being addressed or not.
Well, certainly if it's brought up on the More Perfect Union, the authorities in Washington will be aware of it tomorrow.
Right.
And finally, Rebecca, you so beautifully and perfectly were channeling Katie Britt at the top of the show that, if I may, could I ask Katie a question or two about this year's Oscars?
Yes, Kevin. Yes.
Katie, as we speak now, it's a few hours before the Oscars, and I'm going to ask you about your predictions. But first, Katie, how did you feel about Barbie being snubbed this year at the Oscars?
I believe that the Barbie movie was preaching a false idea of womanhood and trying to indoctrinate our most vulnerable children with feminist ideals. And if we don't understand that the patriarchy should really be about horses, then you are just Ken, Kevin.
And lastly, Katie, do you have any predictions for this year's Oscars?
I would like to nominate Scarlett Johansson for her portrayal of me on Saturday Night Live last night.
That's not a movie, Katie. That's a television show.
Facts don't matter, Kevin. Facts don't matter. Like they don't matter when I talk about a young girl who was trafficked under the Biden administration. And by Biden administration, I mean Bush administration in America, by which I mean Mexico. For those who didn't follow that story, Katie Britt told a very compelling story about a woman who was a victim of trafficking. And Senator Britt made it sound like it was something that had happened quite recently in the United States. And in fact, the woman's story took place during the Bush years, and it entirely took place in Mexico. So it is not the fault of anyone in the United States, certainly not Joe Biden.
But Nancy Mace would say that for pointing out those facts, you are rape shaming.
Yes. Another reference to something that was said in the news this morning.
And again, as Democrats, I would like to say we are not pro-trafficking and rape. Like, we don't like that. That's why we try and pass things like the Violence Against Women Act. We try and pass red flag laws to make sure people with domestic abuse accusations against them can't get more weapons. We are trying to have comprehensive sex education that teaches the idea of consent. We are not in favor of anybody trafficking anybody or raping anybody. Our policies do reflect that. And Katie Britt needs some smelling salts.
And it's why Joe Biden made the bipartisan border deal that was so good. Even Mark Langford at the State of the Union had to admit that Biden was right about it.
James Langford,
thank you.
James Langford wrote it.
Right. And he just sat there and said, yep. He just sat there and said, yep, that's true. Yep, that's true. Yep, that's true. We had a plan in place to begin to fix the situation at the border. But Donald Trump put the kibosh on it because he wants the issue to run against in the fall of 2024. He's not interested in fixing anything. He's just interested in complaining about things.
And with that, we want to thank everybody.
Make of that what you will.
And we want to thank you for listening. If you like what we do here, please share our show, the link to our show on your timeline, on your Facebook timeline, and on your other social media platforms so your friends can discover us as well. We also want to thank the great Alan Keeney. We miss you dearly, Alan. He's the man who composed and plays our MPU podcast theme. And with that,
Greg Batuzak couldn't be with us today. He's off playing saxophone somewhere, and I think he would do like star-studded red carpet nachos with lots of like pimentos in the cheese to mirror the red carpet, and eat them while wearing lots of borrowed Harry Winston jewelry on your hands.